Hey, what's up, YouTube? Blessings and welcome back to the Hellenistic Astrology channel. I'm astrologer Elsa Wadsworth, and I'm here today with Matt Nolan from the Astrologer's Encyclopedia. Hey, Matt.
Hello. How are you?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Awesome. So before we begin with chapter 91 and 92, I just want to do a little housekeeping. If you guys notice a shift in sound quality, I am now an official podcaster. Thank you to Marcus. Marcus, what's up? Marcus Wadsworth for this awesome gift. And thank you to all our Patreon supporters for making the sound quality possible. Coming to you with some professional vibes now. And now I just need the headphones.
Yep. Yeah, and I need a microphone. So we got, between the two of us, we have enough equipment.
Exactly. Okay. So here we are at Predominator, chapter 91, the Epikratetor. Is that what we're going with?
That is my guess. There's the long sign over the E. So that's what I think. Epikratetor.
Scott is like rolling in his green. Like, stop. But okay, so here we are in this predominator technique. So we're going to kind of break this down for you. This is varied, and we're going to get into why this comes with a whole lot of asterisks and a whole lot of kind of side notes. So stay tuned for that. So the predominator means to confirm, to predominate, of course, to be victorious, to prevail, to be superior. And it was considered to be like an all-important first step in a lot of techniques. So what is agreed upon is that this is very important. What Demetra says, and what you will soon find out, is although it's all important and everyone stresses it's important, no one agrees on how it's done. So when Matt and I were practicing with our charts and other charts, for myself, there's five techniques that we're going to outline today. And in doing all five, I got 5 different predominators, and Matt practically the same. And
I think I got like 3 and then realized I got 2 of them wrong.
Yeah, okay. And then I got one that didn't work at all. Even with all the 5 steps, like I couldn't have chosen one. And we went through some other charts and stuff. So just as a, heads up, if you are trying these techniques and you get a lot of different ones, normal, and proceed with that in mind, as well as, we've had some hot debates, and we are going to continue with these hot debates in our private study groups with why this might be and what it might mean philosophically. So please comment below if A, you have questions, or B, you have ideas about this and why it could be, or the philosophies behind, is this even a technique that's available to all charts? Because let's say you have a chart where the predominator consistently comes back as the same one, then you would be an amazing candidate for this technique probably. And if you're not, perhaps that says something about the life and the maybe prominence or the ability to use this technique. Now, this technique is important because it confirms what is needed to find the oikodespotes, or the master of the nativity. And the master of the nativity and the predominator are very important when it comes to length of life technique. As we know, length of life technique was a very important technique to the Hellenistic tradition. We don't use it as much now, and maybe this predominator issue is part of it, because everyone that I've talked to about it is like, yeah, the predominator, it's like, it's too ambiguous and I don't use it or whatever, And then also, not a lot of people want to have the year or some options of when they're going to die. They don't want to know that. That's like a little much. But we do know that length of life technique was very important in this tradition. And the predominator is like the first important technique in order to filter through to length of life technique, which is what we are going to be doing throughout the next few months. So we are willing to change our minds as we go, willing to talk about it as we go, and just letting you know that these are not set in stone. So please let us know your thoughts, let us know your questions. And if you are intimidated or confused, join the club.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So like Elsa said, this is complicated and vague, and I think it's also kind of noteworthy for being a way that Hellenistic astrology differs a lot from what we're used to in modern astrology, where this is a lot more like a math problem than maybe what we're more used to doing with astrology. And there's a lot less sort of extrapolating and interpreting, and like we're trying to follow these very specific steps, which, like Elsa said, are all different. And so it's a bit strange, I think, for my mind at least, to wrap around as like a modern person.
Yeah, and it's
to think through this technique.
Yeah, exactly. And it has so many implications as well philosophically for us. And whether it did or it didn't, and maybe that's why it varied so much, is due to the philosophical milieu that these astrologers were presenting from. So I think that's really important. And it's not just mathematics, which is like, that which system of house division that we are going to be using to do these techniques, which Demetra said, if it's not explicitly stated by the author, she defaults to whole sign houses. So that's obviously what we are going to do for this. But I was also going to say that it's about the assignment of the ruler. So a lot of times these have been straightforward thus far, right? So it's the ruler of the house that is the how we're assigning it. So if it's Taurus, we've got Venus. It's very straightforward. We have the triplicity lords. They're laid out in a chart. So far, to find the assigned planet has been a straightforward series of guidelines, which we now have to break away from and be lost in the sauce. And I think there's a lot of different ways that someone could narrow in their focus and choose for themselves. And maybe we can get into that at some point, but we're not going to get into that today because even Demetra doesn't give us guidelines on maybe how to choose. If you're a hardcore Valens head, maybe you stick to the Valens technique, obviously. If there's a philosophical sort of strata that you use to define your practice, you're going to maybe default to one. And that would be a boon for you if you had that, so that you could be like, okay, this is the one that I'm choosing because of A, B, and C. But a lot of us aren't going to be at that point yet. And I know that I am not, and Demetra doesn't give us like a solid guideline, but she does lay out the methods of Antiochus and Porphyry in depth before she lays out any of the other authors. I don't know if this shows a favorability to that technique or if it was just the easiest and the most thorough for her to cover and made it easiest for the students to sort of grasp to start. So what we've done today is a little bit different than what you've seen us do, just sort of outlining the book thus far. We're just talking about the chapters. We don't have a lot of chart examples or presentations, but because even at Triplicity Lords, we were like, we probably should have showed that chart or whatever of the Triplicity Lords chart. We're like, okay, these things are getting more varied and more complicated. So Matt was generous enough to put together, almost more like you do on the Astrologer's Encyclopedia, which is your channel, some like an outline for us to follow so that you guys have a visual bullet point and the opportunity to check it out with the chart if you'd like. I recommend, if you don't already have, a series of 5 celebrity charts you're working or 5 family or friend charts that you're working, something other than your own chart, absolutely try it with your own chart. You are going to have biases towards your chart of being like, well, why in the world did this amazing planet or whatever not be a candidate, like according to the rules? So what I would suggest at first, before you start to be like adding the other techniques to this, is literally just follow the steps, cast out planets that you might not want to cast out if they're called to be cast out, and do this for a few charts and see how many charts you find a similar predominator or how many charts you find a different predominator. And I think that gets us through housekeeping. Do you have any other notes before we begin?
Yeah. So, we've been talking about this as something that's very like difficult and vague, which is true, but I think it's also kind of exciting because it's an area that is ongoing and living. And we were talking last night about we listened to like the Schmidt tapes, Elsa and I and some others, and we were talking about how exciting it is kind of to not know and not have it like set in stone, and then we can really kind of dig in and explore as we're going. So this is a topic that people today can work out for themselves, and like Elsa said, discuss the implications of it. Why would someone want to do select certain houses as relevant for the predominator over others, and so on
And
and so forth.
maybe we can try to get into that as we do the outline, and forgive us and correct us if we happen to not do that. But as we go through the outline, we will try. And I guess just straight out of the gate, let me just say that it's not entirely without rhyme or reason. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that you favor the sect light according to the chart. And if you don't have the sect light, a lot of authors will say, okay, ascendant, then maybe some people, a lot of fortune, a lot of spirit, prenatal lunation, and we're going to go over all of those. So you're already using methodologies of picking the predominator that are going to seem familiar. Mm-hmm. It's just how to do that. Some people are saying, it's these, like you have to totally take out the cadent houses from consideration. And other authors are saying, not the cadent houses that actually have aspect to the ascendant. Those support the ascendant. Those can be used. So we will get into this. It will become clear as it's revealed, as clear as it can.
It will, we will hopefully allow it to unconceal itself, right?
Yeah, reveal
That's
itself.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so shall we? The predominator, the Epikratetor.
Okay, so we have, I believe, 5 methods. We have the Antiochus Porphyry method, and I believe what happened here is that Porphyry is citing Antiochus in like the 4th century. Porphyry was, and Antiochus is from sometime around the 1st century.
Yeah, exactly. Antiochus comes from 1st century. Porphyry is late 3rd century, and Porphyry is the one who's sometimes cited as the author of the introductory part of Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos. So I also, I wish I would have been more prepared for this video. I have looked at Antiochus and Porphyry, like the source authors, but this video is making me, and our study groups are making me dive deeper in. So what I don't know from personal experience yet, and I obviously trust Demetra, but she doesn't go into it deeply, is Porphyry exactly citing Antiochus, adding to Antiochus, critiquing Antiochus, or absolutely just 100% copying exactly what Antiochus wrote to do, or clarifying Antiochus? But she links the two as using the similar or complete method. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to outline the Antiochus Porphyry method, and Porphyry is, quoting Antiochus.
Yep. And so this is the method that she lines out in chapter 91 in a lot more depth than the other ones. And so, like Elsa was saying, I don't know if that means that this is like the one that she favors, or maybe Antiochus is, he is the earliest in the tradition, like he comes before Valens and Ptolemy. So maybe that's why she did it. But again, that's just kind of speculation. So I have my own chart here just as like a visual if people want to practice. My chart is obviously a night chart. So if you want to practice in a day chart, either find a different chart or pretend that the sun is above the horizon.
Yeah, we're just giving you a central focus here to have a chart with us.
So first off, what you want to do is say, is the sun, and these are Antiochus or Porphyry's words, rising in the east? And so what Demetra says is it in the 1st, 10th, or 11th house? If it is, you've found your predominator. If it's not, you have to see if it's not in one of these, or if the sun is declining in the west or cadent, as it is like in this chart, then the moon predominates if it's in the 1st, 2nd, 11th, or 10th. And just a little note here is that Demetra says it's not entirely clear if he means the 9th house, as in the declining house in the west, or the entire western half of the chart, which would be the descending half of the chart. And
And
so
this is sort of what I think is happening because they don't include these houses as being appropriate or available. And so, and we don't know, again, we're defaulting to whole sign, but it could be anything dynamically set past the MC. And anything after it's at its lowest point of the chart. So like the fourth house or the IC, because then those planets technically are on the rise to the ascendant. And so when we say, so essentially in this technique, you're only looking from the first house to the 10th house, and you have to disqualify the 12th because it's
declining.
Declining, and it has no aspect to the ascendant. So
and so if neither of those conditions is met, and again, this is only in a day chart, then you default to the ascendant. And so, or I'll get to that in the night chart. So for a night chart, you start with the moon, and this is a common thread in all of them, is that you start always with the sect light. And so is the moon ascending in the east? And so maybe another note on that word ascending, the reason that Elsa just disqualified the 12th is that it is a declining house, even though it's moving upward in the sky. So let me just kind of annotate that. So basically what we're looking for is planets that are moving this way, except the 12th, because that 12th is declining away from the first. And so the Greek word for this is apoklima, I believe, which literally just means declining. It's falling away from an angle. These are weak houses, right? And so with the Predominator, we're looking for a planet that is commanding and victorious and strong, right?
and then obviously another way of putting that is the 12th house is the only one of these, and I guess the second house, because it's so prominent in rising to the ascendant, but it's in aversion. It's the worst house. There's no way that it can help the ascendant. So always, I think in every method, the 12th house is absolutely not an option.
As well as the sixth.
They all have in common.
And so, this is a night chart. We can kind of examine this. The moon is not in one of those houses in this chart. So then we move on to the second condition. If the moon is declining in the west or simply not in one of those houses, and the sun is in the second, then the sun predominates. So the sun is not in the second. So the sun is not predominating. If the sun and moon are both under the earth and both angular, or I should have said or there, or succedent, then the moon predominates. So that would be if they're both in the fourth house in a night chart, right? Or if the moon is cadent, so let's pretend that the moon is here in the third and the sun is here in the fourth, then the sun predominates. And if none of these conditions are met, then the ascendant predominates. The ascendant would be the predominator. So I hope you're kind of seeing what we mean. Like this is a little bit more of like I said, like a math problem, and we have to keep all these conditions in our head as we're going.
And like the sun and the moon both being under the earth, like in some of these that you'll see, it absolutely everything under the earth is disqualified. But in this case, it's not. So we're saying, okay, so the sun and the moon are both under there. But if one happens to be more angular, even though like in this case, we're favoring the moon, and we know that because we want the moon to predominate because it's the sect light in a night chart. But if the sun is more angular, then default to the sun.
Yep. And if they're both angular, then the sect, predominates over the non-sect factors, and you take the moon.
Right.
So that is the Antiochus Porphyry method. So next is Dorotheus, and his is kind of like wildly different.
And let's just say Dorotheus of Sidon is late first century as well. So maybe just after the first century Antiochus writing. So he's also a really early author. So Dorotheus also, I think it's worth noting, is one of, or the primary source for Masha Allah, Saul bin Bishr, and those authors. So that's, if you're using some of those later Hellenistic Arabic authors, this is probably going to be in that milieu, I guess we could say. Yeah,
that's a really good point, is that Dorotheus sort of found himself continued very nicely into the medieval tradition. Another point is that the text that has come down to us is like 3 translations away from the Greek. So it was in Greek, then in Persian, then in Arabic, and then in English, at least the Van Dyke's translation. And this is part of our conversation with the Schmidt stuff last night, is that you do lose something each time. So that should just be kept in mind. So he has kind of a two-step process where first you have to find the predominator and then you have to confirm it. So starting with, day and night, it's the same steps, unlike in Antiochus. So you say, is the sect light in the 1st, 11th, or 10th house? In this case, no. If not, check the other light. Is it in those houses? No. Followed by the lot of fortune. Yes, in this chart, it's in the 1st. And then let's say the lot of fortune was like in the 8th or something. You would then check the prenatal lunation, which for those who don't know is simply the most recent new or full moon before birth. So in this chart, it would be, about 6 hours before birth was a new moon in Aries. So that would be the prenatal lunation around 6-7 degrees. So in this case, we have the lot of fortune qualifying because it's in the 1st house. And then if none of those fit, you default to the ascendant. So once we have a predominator selected, we have to confirm it. And this is, again, kind of a tricky thing. So the first thing that we check is the bound lord.
Yeah, because hold on. Because, okay, so we have to confirm it. So this is great. This goes back to like testimony of 3. Okay, so we found something that works. Let's see if it's actually strong enough to work is where we're going with this, I guess. But there's nothing that says if it's not confirmed, don't use it. Or if it's not confirmed, I guess hop back to the ascendant. I mean, everyone defaults to like if it's not, then the ascendant, I guess.
It's kind of like if nothing works, then the ascendant, except balance. But
right. Okay.
So basically what we do is we look first to the bound lord. And this is also kind of a common idea, is that there's this order of importance, right? So the lot of fortune here is our candidate. We say in the bounds of Venus. So we have to see if there is an aspect from Venus to this exact bound. So what we would want to see, this bound is from like 7 to 12 or 13 Aquarius. We would want to see Venus, for example, at 8 Sagittarius, casting a ray into this bound. It's important to note that Venus herself doesn't have to be in her own bounds, but she has to cast her ray into this bound in order to confirm it. So if that doesn't work, as is the case here, Venus is not casting a ray into her bound, you then look in this order. You examine the domicile lord, the trigon lord, the exaltation lord, and the decan lord. And so in this case, we would look at the domicile lord. We say Saturn, there's a whole sign aspect. Demetra says it may be the case that a whole sign aspect configuration is sufficient for witnessing for lords other than the bound lord. She does also mention that an orb is kind of hinted at, but it's not entirely clear what that orb should be. So in this case, we're going to take it as a whole sign aspect from Saturn. And then we could also examine the triplicity lord by night, which would be Mercury. And then there's no exaltation lord. I can't remember what this decan lord is, the first one of Aquarius. But we have 2 conditions of witnessing for the candidate. So therefore it's confirmed.
Yeah. And so then why start with a very stringent thing where you have this small allotment or apportionment of the bound lord? And if that planet isn't exactly aspecting the bound lord, then go to all these very more general lords, and maybe with orbs and maybe whole sign aspect. We talked a little bit about this last night, and we're just saying like, okay, that either makes a strong confirmation for a very strong predominator, or maybe a weak confirmation for a weak predominator. Does that have philosophical implication if you have only a weak confirmation versus a strong confirmation? Great question.
Who knows, right? Well, so there's two ways of putting that, I think, that are good. Is one, if we continue sort of the courtroom image, right, where planets are being witnessed in a court, where let's say Jupiter's up here in Libra witnessing Venus by a trine. Jupiter is giving this very beneficial testimony on Venus's behalf. So imagine Venus is on trial for something and she has a very strong witness for the defense, right? Then that's going to help Venus's case. And then if we think of the predominator as someone who's a conqueror, someone who's victorious, we can think of like a king almost, right? then we can have
a superior
a
lord.
prevailing force, right? So then let's say Jupiter, or let's say Venus here is up in the bounds, casting her ray into the same bounds from Libra or from any aspect, whatever. This is like a strong confirmation of this planet's or this predominator's ability to be victorious, right? So then it's the king has like a solid base of support, versus we have these two relatively weak testimonies. It could be like a conqueror or a king or a victor who has less support, less stability. And again, that's our own speculation.
Yeah, and then once you have that, what is the implication? Because now you're using the predominator to find the oikotes to find the length of life. And does this just mean that if you have a weak witnessing, yeah, you can still use it, but does that have philosophical, or shall I say interpretive value or not? If you have a very strongly confirmed predominator in all the techniques, it comes back to the sect light, the sun in a day chart, then that life is more vital and more prevailing than someone who has to use the lot of fortune or the lot of spirit and does not have any strong witnessing from that bound lord or confirmation from that bound lord, or let's say like a weak non-superior aspect from the bound lord. So all these questions are good questions.
Yeah, and we do not have the answers. So next is the Valens method, and this is one that is difficult to kind of encapsulate in a single slide. So basically, either light can predominate, but you start with the sect light. So in this case, you'd start with the moon, and then you just kind of, it depends on the relative sort of angularity of the planet. So a lot of times he'll say like a out of sect light in the 11th or 10th is better than the sect light in like the 9th or the 7th, right? So it kind of just depends on that. When both lights are cadent, so when neither light has any angularity, as in this case, predomination defaulted to either the ascendant or the midheaven, and he gives some specifics on that. There's a table on page 1053 outlining the various conditions for which light predominates over which other light. And then finally, he's the only one who gives like sign considerations. So the sun in Libra or the moon in Scorpio, so both in their fall, cannot predominate, which I think is very interesting and adds to that idea of the predominator needing to be strong and victorious, right? And so a planet that has fallen is weak, cast out, marginalized, all of these things. So therefore it cannot predominate. And this is the method that we were looking at Elsa's chart, and we could not find a predominator. So,
and it's interesting. Is Valens the one that? No, it's Paulus who allows the 9th house to be.
Valens allows the 9th house sometimes. So, like, let me see if I can just find that.
See, okay, so because Valens does not address the case of the sun in the 9th house and the moon in the 6th, he may have defaulted to either the ascendant or the midheaven as the predominator. So I guess he doesn't. Where we can send you is, I think it's in the beginning of book 3 of Valens where he talks about this. So I guess if that's any help. Also, Valens, for those of you who don't know, is like just after or contemporaneous with Dorotheus of Sidon. So again, just that 2nd century CE, middle 2nd century CE. Okay.
Yeah,
so
and so he has on 1053, there's like a list for when the moon predominates over the sun, and the moon in the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 10th, 11th, or 5th predominates over the sun in the 9th. And for Elsa's case, she has the moon in the 7th and the sun in the 9th, and we just couldn't find specifically anything saying if the moon in the 7th predominates over the sun in the 9th. And
because they're both technically setting in the west, so one's angular, one's cadent, but the sect light is the sun, but the moon is actually more angular than the sun. So it is, I guess, just this to be said, if you go through that very laborious and long chart and your conditions still are not in there, that will happen. It seems like they're covering every possible condition, but in a lot of cases, they are not actually addressing the 7th house specifically. Now, the 7th house will be addressed specifically in some, but only for the moon. And and we don't know if they're talking about, but only for the moon if it's a night chart. They don't specify if you can use the moon in the 7th house in this case if you have the day chart.
Yeah, and like I would just reason also that if the moon in the 4th predominates over the sun in the 9th, I would assume that the 7th does as well, but he just doesn't specifically say.
Yeah.
That would be my thinking.
So,
So
there
again, we
are
have another
cases.
case here of this is, tricky, right? So Ptolemy
is middle 2nd century. Claudius Ptolemy. Here we go.
So he uses equal houses for this technique, and he has sort of a specific brand of equal houses where he starts the first house 5 degrees before the ascendant. So if we're taking this chart as an example, the ascendant is at 11 degrees, we would move back 5 degrees to 6 degrees and 30 minutes of Aquarius, and then shoot that forward 30 degrees. And that will be the first house. And then you just keep jumping in 30-degree increments. This is just,
and for you guys that are like absolutely screaming at the screen right now, we did not, this chart is still in whole sign. It is not in equal houses.
I didn't know I could do that. I know you could do equal houses, but I didn't know you could do the 5 degrees.
Not the
anyway.
5 degrees. No, you don't. You would just have the equal houses and then visualize the 5 degrees. Yeah.
So Ptolemy has, again, different techniques for day and night. So for a day chart, pretend this is a day chart, or do this on your own chart or any day chart. We say, is the sun, the sect light, in the 10th, 1st, 11th, 7th, interesting that he gives the 7th, or 9th. If the sun is not in one of these houses, then we move on to the moon, and we say, is the moon in one of those houses, those same houses, the 10th, the 1st, 11th, 7th, or 9th? If it's not, then, and this is a little confusing, we see if a planet in one of those houses, again, the 10th, 1st, 11th, 7th, or 9th, he lists them in that order. So this must be, again, another strong case for the Predominator if it's in the 10th versus a relatively weak one if it's in like the 7th or 9th. We look to if a planet in one of those houses has 3 or more modes of rulership over the sun, prenatal new moon. So not if it's a prenatal full moon is the one before you were born, you would go back even further to the new moon, or the ascendant. And so I think what he means here is that it has to have individually 3 modes of rulership over one of these. It can't be like all of them tallied up.
Yeah, so start with the sun. If you don't have 3 modes of rulership, then go to the prenatal new moon, look for 3 modes of rulership supporting it. And if not, go to the ascendant. And if you do not have 3 modes of rulership over the ascendant,
then the ascendant is the Predominator. And so what we mean by 3 modes of rulership would be domicile, exaltation, trigon, bound, or decan. And so, that's going to be probably hard to find. That would be like the sun in Taurus and in Venus's bounds and in a day chart, right? That would be 3 modes of rulership. If Venus was, for example, in one of those houses. So this is, I think, probably not going to be common, but it is one of the conditions. So if you don't have any of those, default to the ascendant. For a night chart, you say, is the moon in the 10th, 1st, 11th, 7th, or 9th? Again, in that order. If not, which in this case it's not, check the sun. Is the sun in one of those houses? Which I think is kind of interesting for a night chart, because that's basically impossible unless it's in the first. And Ptolemy does, or Demetra does say this about Ptolemy, is that he essentially rules out any planet below the horizon, unless it's in that part of the first house, which is below the horizon. So just worth noting that if the moon is not in one of these houses, the sun probably isn't going to be unless it's in the first.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Where in the first, it being below the ascendant would be the only possibility. So only part of the first house would be the possibility for a night chart.
Yep. So if the sun is not one of those houses, and this is a little different than for a day chart, choose the planet in one of those houses, again, the 10th, 1st, 11th, 7th, or 9th, with the most rulership over the moon, prenatal full moon. So again, full moon specifically. So in this case, I would have to go all the way back to the full moon in Virgo, or the lot of fortune. So this is, you don't need 3 modes of rulership. So in this case, we would find that the sun or the moon being in the bounds of Venus, Venus is in the first house. So Venus would actually be the Predominator. So if no planet has been chosen, default to the ascendant. If the prenatal lunation was a new moon, so let's pretend Venus is somewhere else in this chart, the prenatal lunation here is a new moon, we would default to the ascendant if it was a full moon before birth. So that would be if you have a waning moon, then you would default to the lot of fortune. So that would be Ptolemy in a night chart. Again, it's confusing, but give it a couple listens or read it in the book, and it should make sense. Just go through it slowly.
And we tried our best to just take what was given in Demetra's book and outline it with some visuals for you. Just because if we tried to say just only these words, your mind would explode.
it wouldn't be fun.
Yeah. Okay.
So finally, we have the Paulus method, and Paulus does not divide it by day and night, although you do, as always, start with the sect light. So Paulus has.
We are kind of dividing it by day or night because we're not saying day procedure, night procedure, but we're always starting with the sect light. So that in a way it kind of does, but we're not using different procedures, but we are looking at sect conditions, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so the point is that, like Ptolemy has a pretty different procedure for day and night with like the 3 modes of rulership versus just the most, which I think is interesting. I don't really know why he would do that, but it's interesting to think about. So Paulus has these, Demetra calls them authoritative houses, and they are different for the sun and the moon. So let's pretend that we have, just using this chart again, it's a night chart. We would start with the sect light. Is the moon in the 1st, 10th, 7th, 4th, 5th, 11th, 2nd, and 8th? Unfortunately not. So then we would look to the sun. We would look to the 1st, 10th, 11th, and then in the 7th or 8th, if those 2 houses, whichever one of the 2 contains a masculine sign. So in my chart, we would look to the 7th to consider the sun. In Elsa's chart, we would look to the 8th because the 8th sign is a masculine one rather than the 7th. So again, if the sun falls in one of those houses, the 1st, 10th, 11th, 7th, and 8th, if the 7th or 8th are a masculine sign, whichever of the 2. So neither of those apply. So then if neither is in an authoritative house, check the prenatal lunation, which again, this would be the new moon in Aries, not in an authoritative house. And then the lot of fortune, and then the lot of spirit. This is a spot where she doesn't say, she just says, check the lot of fortune and lot of spirit. I'm putting it in that order, but that's not necessarily set in stone.
Right. You put it in that order too. She said lot of fortune, lot of spirit, but she didn't say, like in some of them, she specifies in that order. And she didn't necessarily say in that order exactly.
Yeah. So we were talking about this yesterday, and it's like, they both apply here. They're both in the 1st. And so like, I don't know which one to choose. I was saying maybe because it's a night chart, you would choose fortune because that's kind of like the moon's lot. But again, that's just. Which
I completely agree with. So I don't know if this would apply the lot of spirit in a day chart being favored. So,
Another thing to consider. So in this case, we would land on the lot of fortune. We would say the lot of fortune is the predominator, assuming that's the correct order. But if it's not, then you default to the ascendant. And she notes that in this method, it's not clear if the predominator needs to be confirmed by witnessing, which is frustrating.
There's like a catch to all of these where you're like, okay, then frustration or whatever. So everyone chill.
So those are the 5 methods. This I kind of love this technique and all the mystery behind it, but it's really not fun to try to use if you want like a quick result.
Right. And then knowing that it's like ultra important and then it's ultra elusive is also kind of cool and also kind of frustrating. So you're not alone in that. And then, we're going deeply through Valens in the Greek, like in private or whatever. So if more becomes illuminated to us when we're reading that, we will follow back up. And then Firmicus, we'll talk about it a little bit as well. So we will cover that when we go over Firmicus starting at the new year. So we might have some illuminations, which Demetra says Firmicus is altogether different,
And that doesn't say why. It doesn't say what he does.
Right. And we were kind of trying to go through and we're like, is he just using the Master of the Nativity for this? And so, we haven't gotten deep enough in ourselves to really give like clarity where we're saying Demetra says this and these authors say this. but this is exactly what we've used and this works. And so here's where we fall. We haven't gotten there personally yet. If we do, we will let you know.
Yep.
All right.
And so like at the beginning, we were saying that part of the reason that this is really frustrating is that this is finding the predominator is like the essential first step to length of life, which is what the rest of the book is about. And so that's basically why it's important, is that it signifies the life force. And basically one of the methods is that you sort of progress it until it hits certain points, and then, you die.
Yeah. And so as we get to having to choose the oikodespotase, maybe some more things will become clear on which predominator to use. And in our study group, we haven't decided if we're going to default to a certain author or allow people to default to what they perceive to be the most strong planet of the 5 in order to predominate. Like if we're going to say like, okay, so like out of all of these 5 methods, this predominator is selected more often, or this predominator to me looks the most strong, so I'm going to choose the Paulus technique or whatever it is. So as we get there, I think at least for getting through the rest of the book, and this goes out to the Patreons that are following us, and you can follow along with us on YouTube if you choose. Otherwise, join us for this part of the book in the Patreon. Like we have a $5 tier, so if you just wanted to do like the last few months to get a hang of this, it would be like $10 or 15 USD to like join us for this. So go ahead and do that. But if you are just following on YouTube, even if it's unclear, select one. And I don't care how you select, I guess. Select the one that you like the most or whatever, but select one so that you can continue to follow the procedure, and you're not doing the procedure 5 times on one chart and then getting all these different oikodespotase, all these different lengths of life. Unless, of course, you love to take notes and you have your files and you love to organize things on like, grids on your computer, then go ahead, choose 5 different predominators for one chart and then their oikodespotase, and then follow length of life technique if you'd like. Otherwise, go through it. Whatever you want to do, use your intuition or your proclivities or your philosophies to choose a predominator for yourself to move forward with. And perhaps in the next chapter, it will be more clear to you on which one you would like to choose. And if you want to just be like, well, this one's my best planet and I just want to choose it or whatever. It's good enough for me, I guess, like get yourself selected and stable, at least for the exercise. And then we will be moving forward. And this will be like the basis of our moving forward for next session and the session after. So this is the predominator. All right, you all. Thank you so much again for joining, Matt from the Astrologer's Encyclopedia. Thank you for bringing forth the presentation to make it more clear. I hope you all were able to follow. I hope you come and join for the Patreon. The more voices and more questions we have, the stronger and richer the debate. And again, thank you to all of our Patreons. And thank you, Marcus. You're a genius. All right. Until next time. Ciao. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Matahia mataoka ka bersama yo demikian soba da soba kena matahiba nakau di ma demikian soba. So